So anyways, on directive, I don't know if anybody has seen it. Here, let me stick it in the link in the chat. Directive.
Yeah, I can never get the spelling right for their website.
I know. Let me look at his LinkedIn page. It usually comes up for me because I've been looking at their site.
And while Tracy's looking for that, how is the Persia onboarding coming along?
Yeah, we submitted a ticket to LF Legal, and we received 3 questions from them, which we sent them to Lori and others. And I think, Steve, you are in that thread as well.
Yep.
And then we passed that response back to legal team and waiting for their response. It's like back and forth at the moment. So it's like trademark application as project contribution agreement. Those are the 2 things we got back from legal team.
Right.
So yeah, approximate timeline was like at least a month. So we'll see. We created a ticket last week, so it's only 1 week now. So we have a few more weeks until we finalize the onboarding.
Perfect. Tracy, did you find that link?
I'm having problems today. I'm sorry, guys. I'm almost there. It's DIREKTIVE. DIRE.
It looks like Emil has posted a link.
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Is that the right one?
If that's the correct one. I guess it is.
Yes, that's the one.
Thank you.
I don't know what language it is. Is it? It sounds a bit Swedish, but it's not. I don't think it's Swedish, right? It's Australian.
And of course, I'm interested in it because it's so in line with our CD events. It is all based on cloud events with OPA already built into it. So it's pretty progressed in terms of how they've implemented events, and they've built a lot of vocabulary too. So it may help us in 3 areas.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks really interesting. Thank you for bringing that forward, Tracy.
Do you know if Willem is going to, is he aware of the process of submitting as a project?
I started a stream with him, and it says, myself and Jens had a chat. We are going to give this a go. I'll start preparing the information you've sent through. Talk soon. And that was on the 24th of August. So it's just not even been a week ago.
Okay.
I sent him my calendar and said, if you want to chat about how to get that stuff going, here's my link. And I also sent him the Ortelius project proposal and the Persia project proposal as a format to use. I think that many of us have seen it. I know because at least from the events side, the CD events team have looked at it. But if we want to have Willem present it, I can schedule a time for him to do that. I know he's busy. It's becoming a pretty popular product. He is in, where is he at? I want to say he's in Australia. So he's also at a weird time zone for us. So at 10 o'clock, this time might not be a reasonable time for him to jump in on a call, but we might be able to schedule something that's later in the day for him. I think it's like maybe midnight for him right now, something like that.
It's either 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. Well,
he probably would do that.
It's basically 12 hours off from us.
Yeah. So if we did something, he probably would do that.
And I don't know which part of Australia, if he's eastern or western side, because they have a couple time zones there.
And just in general, the fact that there are people in New Zealand, Australia, uh, in that time zone in general that we don't cater to very well in terms of our open source projects. Ortelius does have an architecture meeting that we have embraced a lot of the folks from that time zone. That's part of the reason why I know Willem, because he's come to some of our open source calls. But it might be something we want to have a conversation about in the future, is how to better cater to Australia, New Zealand.
And I know Persia has one of their members, Shufei, who leads their architecture meeting for folks in China. So a couple of their members is Featureway and Huawei. So he leads. It ends up being like 7 o'clock PST, I think, is when the architecture meeting is that he leads, because he's in the States with the China folks. And I heard that one's interesting because everything's in Chinese.
That would be interesting.
So you have to basically have Shufei translate for you.
Well, it's
All right,
just
any other
just a
news?
thought. Yeah, just a thought. I had two people this past week mention that to me, because all of our working groups and everything we do around like events and vocabulary is not at a time, and they're pretty active down under.
Don't we have a Pacific meeting time for events, city events, either the SIG or the
I think for CD events there is one.
There is one, yeah, on Wednesdays. It's very early for US people, but it's still quite late for Australians. But it's more friendly towards people from China or India as well.
Yeah.
But it's at least possible for Australia to join, I think, that time slot.
Well,
So
maybe we get Willem into the process and he can do something to start something in that area.
We have Brad McCoy, right? Already. Who's
Yeah,
in those meetings sometimes from Australia.
It like we were saying, right now it's like midnight for him right now. So, any other news? All right, so I'll go ahead and go into the next on the list is the Ortelius project. Just a kind of like what we have in the pipeline. So a couple things that we have, speaking of Brad and that group. So one thing that we on that side is we're doing a GitOps flow between Ortelius, Captain, Argo CD, and all that type of level. So there's a working group that is mostly out of Australia that is driving the Captain side of the integration. They are actually going through and writing in Captain, they call them services, some additional services to expand out Captain. Now, Captain is in the CNCF side because I think they came along before the CDF was created. But the integration is spanning cross projects, which is nice. The Git flow process, we from the Ortelius side, we've had some working group meetings, and we have between 8 and 14 members come to that working group sessions, and we've kind of broken out the tasks, kind of assigned them into subgroups at that level. Initially, this is more of like a documentation type of process, and then from there we're going to build out the cloud events that are needed to make all of the whole GitOps process flow between all the products at that level. And then once we have that documented and designed out, then we'll go into the actual coding pieces. Some of the coding pieces I've already started. Like I said, there's a few folks out of Australia that are actually writing the kept-in services and some of the events that we already know about without having to go through and flush everything from start to finish. So that's one thing that's happening on that front.
So, Steve, before you get too far, there's a lot of folks on here that have no idea what Ortelius is or what it does.
Okay.
So I think that maybe we should give a foundation so everybody understands what Ortelius is, what we're doing with, how we interact with the pipeline and the supply chain. Because, and then we can give them an update of what we're doing with the roadmap.
Well, let me just finish. Let me see if I can find the diagram real quick.
While you're doing that, I'll just quickly share my screen and just give a high level of what Ortelius is, just can be on the same page here. All right. So just so everybody knows, Steve and I have a company called Deploy Hub. Back in 2019, we contributed about 80% of this catalog code to the CD Foundation in December of 2019. We have a fairly decent size community. We have about 50 contributors. We have about 200 people who come in and out of meetings. As you all know, that's sort of how it goes. But what we don't have is a big corporate contributor, which we have started that process. I'm reaching out to, I've got meetings scheduled and had demos with people from IBM, their open source community from IBM, I'm talking to VMware, and we have a few others that we're hitting up because we really do at this point need a larger corporate contributor. So we are a governance catalog that sits underneath the CD pipeline, and we suck up as much DevOps intelligence as we can. Part of the problem in a cloud native environment is that we're no longer doing monolithic builds. So we end up with this huge number of external open source and internal source and inner source packages. And we then have to deliver them to clusters and end users. And oftentimes it's hard to track what people are consuming and what versions they are and what the CVEs and SBOMs are at a logical application level. So, there's been more and more information. We were a little bit early, I think, and realizing that what a CD pipeline needs is an evidence store. Tyler Jewell, if you haven't read his blogs, I highly recommend his blogs. They're always great he does a ton of research. He does 2 a year. But he talked about the complexities in a cloud native environment and how the use of a governance catalog was going to be the only way to solve these problems because it's just too difficult for a human to keep this in his head or her head. This is the Uber kind of Death Star. And what we're doing at Ortelius is, while this is the look of the entire a single cluster, to be quite honest, this could potentially be in a single cluster. It probably is. And you have hundreds of those clusters out there running. What an application team is doing is only collecting and watching and worried about a single set of points. And that is what we call the logical application. And we are hyper-focused on organizing and managing the logical application because that's how we see the CD pipeline. Now, the way we gather data, let's say a new package is created or a new service is created. Anytime a new package is created, a new application release is created, just in the same way as we've done with CI builds. A new library gets updated, you recompile your code, you create a new version of a release. So we track at the low level, we track these low level objects. We then track up the chain to the point that we begin tracking at the high level logical application. So a login service is an online loan application, logical application will be impacted when a login service gets created. And that login service may be impacted by a low level open source package. That is the business that we are in, is tracking that data in that order. Most of what we're doing, it feels like we're herding cats because there's so much of it to be done. And what in the supply chain discussion and the work that we're doing around the Open SSF, it's all about tracking SBOMs. There's a discussion about all the different levels of SBOMs. We want to track all the different level SBOM data in a single evidence store so that when change happens, everybody can see why it occurred. We're also working to solve this problem of delivering application level SBOMs to the US government, which many companies require. And the Ortelius open source project does this. We know that, Jim has talked a lot about the importance of SBOMs and hardening cybersecurity. And as I pointed out, Tyler Jewell has had some good conversations about what service governance is and why it's needed. Now, the way we pull this together, we have everything that's generated underneath the pipeline of a CD pipeline. We pull that information in. We pull in the SBOMs, we pull then in the CVEs, and we actually go out and poll for them, every 10 minutes or so, Steve? So they could potentially change. Oh, we can't.
You're muted, Steve.
We have to do it every hour because of the RESTful APIs on the osv.dev slow, so we actually overload their site.
Then we also integrate on the kind of on the right-hand side. This is the component information that we're pulling in as well. We pull in key value pairs. We pull in where they're installed. We would integrate with tools like Spinnaker or Harness or Helm to push that deployment data and bring it back so we know where the versions are that we're tracking, because we do version the inventory. And then we track those logical applications. So our governance catalog then is able to produce some interesting reports. We can produce a blast radius report. So let's say, for example, our cart service got updated and it impacted 15 of our applications. We'd be able to show exactly which applications and in which cluster they are going to be impacted. We can also go and take a look at, let's say we want to know who was using Log4j. We can go search for who is using Log4j and present that kind of data. So on that, I'm just going to open it up for questions and see if any of you have any questions about what we're doing. And then I'll let Steve talk about, there's really three initiatives that we are really working on for this coming year. We got a $75,000 grant from XRP to create an immutable SBOM ledger. And that ledger could be a federated ledger, which Ortelius would manage, and it would allow organizations to have a side chain that allowed them to track their inner source changes. We're doing it now in a relational database. We believe that a ledger technology may be more appropriate for the kind of data that we're tracking and the kind of history that we're tracking. Secondly, we have talked about this, and I'm hoping that we continue to pursue it, and that is integration with Backstage. So Backstage is also a catalog, but Backstage doesn't do the kind of versioning and dependency mapping that we are doing, or the SBOM creation or the logical application. But they do a good job of saying, hey, if you've got a Python module that you're going to create, or a microservice that's going to be written in Python, register it, and we're going to generate your CD pipeline for you, or your project data that you need to continue on this project. They've already got a lot of data about the different microservices. We could potentially pull that in. The third area that we're really looking at help from, and why a larger corporate level contributor would be helpful, is data science. Because now we're tracking the kind of data that could do predictive analysis. Let's say we know that as we build the engine and build the data, we know that a lower level open source package has a vulnerability. We would have the ability to produce and notify anybody who is using the catalog that has occurred and what version it's in, and they would be able to tell where they need to fix it. So, and again, we could do risk values. What's the risk value of a particular inner source microservice? it's being deployed on a regular basis. And it impacts 20 different applications, and it's running in 40 of our clusters. It's probably kind of a high risk service compared to maybe a change to a jar file that's going to impact one team. So in my world, when we think about CD events, in a microservice world, I don't believe that every microservice is the same. And in a CD event world, we could begin pushing that risk analysis up to the CD event, and the CD event then, using policies, could determine what requirements that particular microservice needs to go through in the pipeline in order for it to be pushed out to an end user securely and safely and as fast as possible, which is ultimately the goal of the CD Foundation. So any questions on basically what Ortelius is in general?
Is Deploy Hub and Ortelius the same thing?
So Deploy Hub has some additional features that we held back. Think of us as the cloud beast to Jenkins. One of the areas that we did hold back were the group users. We have in the open source, there's two types of users. There's an administrator and a user. And the pro version, we held back the ability to restrict access to certain what we call domains and objects within the tool, in the same way as CloudBees did with adding user controls and groups to Jenkins. And there's a few other things that relate specifically to, I would call it an enterprise, but they're mainly enterprise features. But other than that, hey, there's Oleg. Other than that, it's the open source version is got no restrictions to it.
And to be clear, you view it as the data store for governance stuff.
Data store for governance with all the DevOps intelligence that we are so in a good habit of leaving in text files and logs underneath the pipeline. So we're bringing all of that kind of data up into the catalog. And where we connect, let me quickly see if I have a quick screen for you there. I think I do.
And this is where the blockchain technology comes into play, because as people make changes to new, if you check in your code and you generate a new service, a new version of the service, we want to make sure that the history is preserved of the older version, so you can actually show progress that developers are fixing things. You can show that at this date we had a log for shell issue, and then 3 days later they fixed it, and that's where the immutable ledger comes into play as part of that process. And
So
where we gather most of our information is actually at the CI level of the pipeline.
So where we are triggered, we're triggered in two places on the pipeline. So a microservice developer would create a new build image for their container, or a monolith for that matter, but let's just think about it in cloud native. We interface with the Git, artifact repos, any of the SBOM and CVE scanning. We pull that into the catalog. We also interface at that point. We can be triggered at the point in time that the deployment occurs. And at that point in time, we can grab information about where it was sent. So we're triggered mainly at the image build here. That's where we determine if there's been a SBOM scanned. We also, at that point in time, when we are triggered at that image build, we know a new image is out there. That is when we go and we grab the SHA, and we grab the commit and any of the information that we need to create the new version of the component. And then we look to see every logical application that's consuming that particular component, and we create new versions of that component. The kinds of components we can manage are files, containers, and databases. And believe it or not, those three types covers everything that we're creating at this point in time. There may be a fourth one in the future, but there hasn't been one yet. And the reason why we have to have different component types is because there's different attributes for each of those components. For example, a database component is going to have a SQL statement that may have a rollback associated to it, and that's an attribute that's unique to a database update. Same with a container. A container is going to have some different attributes than a straight file. So we are connected into, say, any of the, we have customers that are using Jenkins and other tools that connect to us at that point. Now, Steve started this conversation about CD events and where we get pulled in at the CD events and what we're doing around Kepton and hope to be doing around Directive in the future.
Yeah, so in this diagram, when the changes are made by the developer to the Git repo, whether they're doing um, a source code change that's going to trigger a new build, or they're going to do a new deployment through a GitOps model, that is where we're going to be capturing and looking at the events that are coming through the pipeline. So that's where the hooks are initially in the GitOps model is in that event-based process. Now, one of the things that once we get our event process flushed out, we will be contributing those events that we have specifically around Ortelius back to the events vocabulary. So
Another
reflection.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I have a reflection. We had yesterday on our CD events meeting a presentation from Mike Lieberman on Fresca, the Fresca architecture, the Fresca framework. It sounds I mean, it's not the same thing, of course, but it seems that Ortelius could maybe fit into there as well. Have you thought of that in any sense? Fresca is the implementation of the CNCF reference architecture for secure software supply chain.
We have not looked at that yet. It would be nice if you could drop us the information. We'll take a look at that.
Yeah, I'll paste the link to Fresca, and then I can paste also the link later on when we have the recording and the presentation in place.
That'd be great.
Yeah, great.
So in general, when we talk about Ortelius, we are hoarding all this data and making these relationships, kind of linking together the puzzle pieces as application developers are making their changes. And what we see is that is as information starts becoming available to us from the supply chain side of things. So we know that a package was built and signed with SigStore. That SigStore information is important to us to associate to the package, which then associates to the container and so on. So we will be consuming those additional information as they become available. And same thing like with Persia. When Persea's build consensus network becomes available and they have a blockchain backing their piece of things, we'll be sucking in that information as well.
And then we just have one ask of the team. We are starting to build out the blockchain architecture. It would be really great if we had a blockchain expert take a look at the architecture before we pursue with coding it. We do have access to some of the XRP folks, but we're hoping to get somebody that is not an XRP person to take a look at the architecture and let us know if there's a better direction or make recommendations. And it would be a paid engagement. So if anybody has somebody they know who would be a good candidate for taking a look at the architecture, please let me know.
So that's what we have going on with Ortelius. We like Tracy said, just to recap, we have the three main focuses, the GitOps, Backstage, and then the immutable blockchain ledger is where we're focused coming this next year. And the blockchain work is actually going to start in September. So that's where we'll be launching, and we have to do monthly reporting back to the XRPL grant team of our progress. So all that will be transparent and available to everybody to see how we're moving along.
And of course, if any of you want a deeper dive or want to make contributions to the data we're collecting, or give us feedback in any way, let me know, and we will schedule some time to do that. And Brad McCoy is being quiet today, but he has been a great contributor to the project. And Brad, we thank you for all your hard work.
Thank
And thank you for staying up late tonight.
It's okay.
I guess it's almost earlier for New Zealand. Yeah, thanks a lot for this presentation. Looking forward to see how Artelius evolves. Yeah, thanks a lot for bringing so many standards together. So hopefully it will be beneficial for the foundation and for its ecosystem. Are there any additional comments or questions?
On the subject of GitOps, so a little bit tangential, I would like to say something about the GitOps certified developer exam that we're developing, but this can come later in the schedule.
Okay. So yeah, we can try to glance through the agenda. There are a few topics. But yeah, sorry for being late first. If somebody is already driving, they just take it over and I'm fine with it. Should I do that? Okay.
Yeah, just on a side note, the Artelius website is down. Yeah. Right, I see that they're moving it around, but we have had, I don't know if all the open source projects have to do this, but every 3 months we have to ping the Linux Foundation to update our signature. Steve, we can't hear you.
Is it because of Let's Encrypt?
Yeah, it's because of Let's Encrypt, and that's where we're actually I'm working with Brad to get the Azure front door sorted out with a new certificate that will be automatically renewed. So we're trying to get rid of that.
So we definitely don't have to ping the CDF or the Linux Foundation for Jenkins. We transferred our domains and everything works smoothly at the moment.
Yeah, so we're moving to that split type of solution where the Linux Foundation owns the domain and that we manage the DNS servers on our side. It just gives us some more flexibility.
Yeah, right now we're managing it in Azure, right? Microsoft is doing that, or
Yes, so we had the Linux Foundation stand up an Azure subscription for Artelius, and that's where it's currently moving over to as we speak. And so in our Azure Kubernetes cluster, we have like Argo kept in, or the Artelius website, the Artelius documentation, and the Artelius like sandbox for folks to play on. Will all be in the Azure cluster. And like I said, and we'll be managing the DNS from the Azure side instead of having to go work with the Linux Foundation IT support for DNS entries.
It should definitely work. So, yeah, should we move on then? So, yeah, thanks again for the presentation. Yeah, so one topic which was waiting for quite a while is about tectonic graduation criteria. So Andrea submitted an issue with overview of tecton state and compliance with different requirements. And I guess we as the TOC need to sign off the criteria. Is it correct, Andrea?
Yeah, thanks, Oleg. Yeah, so I created the issue exactly to just confirm the criteria because it says in our documentation that the project-specific list of criteria needs to be agreed upon with the TOC. And I had also a couple of questions here and there, so I can go through these now if you think you have time, or anyway. But yeah. So basically, I listed here the standard acceptance criteria, like having a governing body, having documented governance documentation, having a healthy number of committers, committing process, and so forth. Yeah, so having a public list of project adopters for at least the primary repo, e.g. in adopters.md or logos on the project website. That's something I think that we are working on. So we have something, but we want to have more. I guess one question was on the OSSF badge, because if you scroll to the top of the issue, I put a list of the Tecton projects. We have a lot of repos, and I think it shouldn't be required for all of these repos to achieve the badge, because some of these repos are related to like Tecton infrastructure. So like for how we run the test, how we deploy Tecton upstream for testing, and the community repo, things like that. So I made there a proposal of what the repos that should meet the OpenSSF badge could be.
So basically,
yeah.
here you include the infrastructure part, which is needed. Well, which is needed for the project, but indeed it's not distributable. It goes to end users.
Yes, and some other projects, like for instance, resolution or experimental, those are, well, experimental is not released, and resolution is an add-on, but it's a new experimental project. So it's still not up to date with everything, but I think it shouldn't be blocking the overall project because it's something we just started, for instance, and same for results. It's a relatively new project, so I don't think that the OpenSSF badge for things like results or resolution should block the overall project.
That's for sure.
And yeah, so that was one of the questions. Then it says other metrics as defined by the applying project during the application process in cooperation with the TOC. And there are some examples, and I think the examples in there, they're quite fitting for Tecton. The first one is about documented release cycles and plans for LTS. And I think this is fitting, so we can have the proper documentation for release cycles. We do have something, we can improve upon it, but we do have clear release cycles, so that should be fine. In terms of LTS, we looked at what Kubernetes does, because we depend on Kubernetes. and there was a Kubernetes working group about LTS for a while, and what they created is this page where basically they say for each release, when it was released initially, what was the latest release or patch release, what is the end of life of that release. And so the result of the LTS discussion was to extend the end of life of each release a bit. So my proposal is that Tecton would define something like this. But yeah, not having an LTS similar to what you have for your Linux distributions, for instance, because I think that it's not applicable to this kind of project.
Yeah. One thing that our requirement is plans, not confirmed LTS and not existing LTS for graduation. So I think it fits the requirements.
Okay. Other requirements, projects that have themselves become platforms for other projects. And I think that's fitting for Tecton, as both Jenkins and OpenShift pipelines are two open source projects that rely on Tecton. They're built on top of Tecton. Projects that are able to attract a healthy number of committers on the basis of its production usefulness, not simply developer popularity. I think this is also a good requirement for Tecton, as several companies that run production services based on Tecton contribute to Tecton upstream, not because it's a cool technology, but because it's used for services, and this could be complemented by the adopters file as well. And the last one is project have several high-profile and well-known end-user implementations. Again, I think this can be used for Tecton. IBM has several offerings, both on as a service or software offering based on Tecton, Google as well, and I mean you could list more. So yeah, so this is mainly what the issue is about, and yeah, I just wanted to get from this group a feeling whether this looks reasonable, if there are other requirements that people think would be needed, and yeah.
Did we do anything more when Jenkins graduated? Was there a process then? I wasn't on the TOC. I just know that we put it through.
No, it was the same process, give or take. One thing that we were discussing for Jenkins and we agreed not to do is security audit, because normally, for example, CNCF projects expect to have a security audit before proceeding to graduation. And the question whether we want to do it for Tecton. For Jenkins, we didn't do that. For Tecton, we have a security audit tentatively scheduled, but I'm not sure where we stand, and I definitely don't have strong opinion that the security audit needs to be completed. But I would like to know what others think.
Actually, the security audit for Tecton was completed, so we did it in March, and we just published the report on the blog, on the CD Foundation blog. Yeah, I mean, I guess the question would be: is it fine to have security audit done at some point in the history of the project? I mean, three projects, the three core projects were analyzed. So the pipeline triggers and the dashboard. So would that be sufficient?
I think what you've done looks great. The only question I have is, as far as like the the long-term support and stuff like that, are you going to produce like a matrix or something that says, you know, this release is currently the stable release, and then it's going to be predicted to be retired, you know, 2 years from now or something like that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that would be the plan. So basically, it's similar to what Kubernetes has. There, Kubernetes, they have this releases page. Let me put the link in the chat, where they say for each release, when it was last released and what is the end of life.
Got it.
So my understanding that we need, as a TOC, we need to create CDF kind of graduation guidelines. Do we not have them?
We already have them. These guidelines were published first time when Jenkins was going through graduation. We updated these guidelines, and afterwards we added a few bits. But basically, we agreed that the guidelines were good enough. So we passed through the incubation, through the criteria, and basically what Andrea presents today is more or less the same as Jenkins did. For Jenkins, a bunch of things were actually not on the checklist of CDF, but on the checklist of the OpenSSF page. So it's actually quite a lot of criteria there, including some community expectations, etc. None is impossible, it just requires some legwork. So I think that documentation is pretty much up to date. So,
And then are we looking at Spinnaker 2 probably needs to go through this process, and we should be looking at graduating Spinnaker in 2023.
Oh, well, I think it should be rather opposite. It should be Spinnaker looking through graduation. But yeah, we had a discussion with the Spinnaker community. I did a presentation to OpsMX. We had a conversation with Armory a while ago, but Carl also restored communications with Spinnaker vendors in spring, if I recall correctly. But basically, it's up to the community. If they want to drive and to pass through this process, then they can. Yeah, the Spinnaker would need some changes to pass through the graduation criteria.
Yeah. So I'm wearing the Tecton maintainer hat in this presentation today.
So what's the next step that we need to do? Do we need to comment on the PR, or do we need to do +1s, or what's kind of like the next step here?
So if we agree that basically we are ready for the graduation review, we can do a presentation for the graduation where these bits would be presented rather from a community standpoint. And after that, we could launch a public vote. So if we as TOC agree that all the content is in place, that all the checkboxes are matched, like I believe so, then we can schedule it.
Yeah, so there is some work that we still need to do to finish, like the OpenSSF patches on some of the project, or document like the releases. But if we at least agree on the list of criteria, this is the list of criteria that we work on, then I can make a small project on Tecton side to include all the pending items, and so we can, come back with an expectation when we do the official submission.
Yeah. So one thing, when you work on that, it would be definitely useful to have links to OpenSSF for the projects. Are you going to just have one OpenSSF entry, or do you plan to have entry for each component?
they ask for a single repo, so you need to have one per repo, basically.
Yes, normally how it works in the LFX, because for all LFX tools try to pull this information, and it should be a single entry. So,
Okay.
yes. I think that will be perfectly fine.
Yeah, I personally think what is laid out in the PR and the approach on how you're going to take the subset of the repos and submit those over to OpenSSF makes sense. Like you said, some things like experimental just don't make sense to deal with on that front. So I think the approach is perfect.
So actually, one of the first empty entries in OpenSSF checklist allows you to specify what is actually in the scope for the review. And this say basically all deliverables shipped by the project, etc., etc. And I believe what is listed on GitHub issue is totally compliant with this criteria. Everyone has experimental projects. It's okay.
Yep.
I have a question about, say, like other projects who want to start the process. Like, do we is there, like a pipeline that is there for the project? So, like, do we tell, like CDF, well, we are going to start the process in 2023 or something? How does that work?
So how it generally works, there is definitely no pipeline on the CDF side because CDF side, especially CDF TOC, is relatively lightweight. So yeah, TOC might provide consulting, etc., but ultimately the most of the legwork is done by the projects, like going through these checklists, going through the OpenSSF badges, all verification, and yeah, so if you have a timeline, and actually, as you may see in a project yearly review, we say that ask one question, which is actually what is your timeline and expectation for the next steps in the CDF. And yeah, what is it? Now change to the. I will migrate it to the new GitHub projects later. But yeah, here, for example, there is a roadmap, and here, for example, you can easily say that Tecton graduation is near term. We can link it whenever. But yeah, if you have some items like Jenkins X graduation on your mind, you can easily put it here. You can let us know that you plan it in your project. You can put it on your project roadmap, and then we are informed that something is coming up. Why it's important? Because even if it's quite easy on the TOC side, so we do the reviews, we do the comments, we do the voting, we host the presentation, there is still a marketing aspect. Yeah, thanks to Steve. And yeah, for marketing, etc., it would be great for CDF to be informed what's coming up in the future.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so since we ran out of time, actually what we agreed last meeting, if we cannot go through all topics on the agenda, we can host another meeting out of order. So my question, would you like to meet next week, same time, so that we go through the remainder of the agenda? Or do we just postpone all the topics until, well, we can discuss them in 2 weeks?
Workstream governance, so it can wait. It's not urgent as well as CD Summit. So that was announcement for those 2 topics. They can be postponed.
And GitOps certified developer exam, I think we can take it offline, like announcing it in TOC channels, etc.
Yeah,
so it doesn't take the meeting. So I think we can easily postpone it. We can easily have a meeting in 2 weeks. Okay. Then we have a plan. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.